My wife's rough to live with.
Now that's on tape, Glenn.
My goodness, now I'm in trouble. Well, she keeps me going down the straight and narrow, so that's great. There's some things that in the latter part of Job chapter 41, of course, we talked about the fire-breathing Leviathan, and some in the past in my classes in college asked me, said, well, do we really take that seriously? Or is that just the animal was so ferocious that almost like it was fire-breathing? Well, the answer is, it's very, very plain. God says it was a fire-breathing animal, they called him Leviathan, and that his breath kindled coals, he breathed fire. Now, there's two things you can do with that and with other scriptures similar in nature. You can say, well, it's really not the truth, it's a good story. All right, well, if you take that position, then God's a liar, and we of all people are the biggest fools there are for believing in the Bible. And so if we run across something that's very plainly stated, like in Job chapter 40, Behemoth, and Job chapter 41, Leviathan, and if we look at that and we say, well, I just can't accept that. Well, if you can't accept that, then we cannot accept that Jesus died on the cross and that the blood he shed on the cross is actually going to take care of your sin. You see, if we can't trust him in one place, we can't trust him in another place. And if your word's not worth anything, then you're not worth anything. So, did Leviathan breathe fire? The answer is real simple, absolutely. Now, do I know exactly which dinosaur it was? No, I don't. Leviathan dwelled in the ocean, came up onto the ground, but his home was in the ocean. What do we know about our ocean?
Steve.
That much. And then we're learning a whole lot more. It's been said over and over and over again, we know a whole lot more about outer space than we know about our own ocean. We just don't know about our ocean. Now, there was one particular fish, Colunkus, I think, of course, Tim, depends on where you're at, how you pronounce it, that was supposed to have been extinct for millions of years. They found fossils of it embedded in rock, and they said, well, it's bound to be millions of years old because we don't have any of them. And then there's something called inconvenient truth. Inconvenient truth just messes up a lot of theories, and a theory is just somebody's idea. You see, a fisherman pulled one up out in the opening there where the Amazon River flows out into the ocean. Pulled one up. Well, that one was not supposed to be in existence. And now they pulled them up in several different places in the world. And the reason why they don't live is because they're at home, they're accustomed to living under high pressure. And pull them up to our pressure and they die. And so we don't see many of them swimming up and down rivers. Don't see any of them swimming up and down rivers. And we don't go out very often in the ocean. And if we do, how far can you see what's under you? It's probably a pretty good thing we don't see what's under us. I've gone out fishing with my dad out in the Gulf, and some of the things they pull in, I would just rather not have seen before. One in particular, a mother-in-law fish. And I thought it was so pretty, and I reached down to touch it, and that guy hollered at me, he said, "Don't you touch that thing." He says, "If you ever touch it, you'll never do it again." And I thought, that sounds like Job 41, except mother-in-law fish was only about that long. So there's another thing about this Leviathan that we learned from reading scriptures. One is that when it crawled up onto the ground, or when it brought itself up onto the mud, it left tracks where its belly, I guess, drug, or its tail, and left places there. We also learned that when it comes to the surface in the ocean, that it makes such a ruckus that you'd think the ocean was hoary or gray-headed. So we know from that he wasn't just a smooth sailing deal like a catfish. He was more aggressive than that. So several of them have said, and in my classes, and I always demanded that my students come up with questions, difficult questions. The more difficult it is, the better I liked it. They said, well, if you look at an alligator or a crocodile, its belly's smooth. If you look at lizards, their bellies are smooth. If you look at a horny toad, its belly is smooth. So what kind of animal would have a belly that is not smooth? Well, we saw at the museum in Chicago, that big dinosaur skeleton they call Sue. After many years of having it on display, they realized that the other bones that came with it were actually like a skeleton on the belly side. But there's also other things. Let's see what we've got here.
You need to turn it on the side.
Isn't that amazing? Got to turn them on. All right. That's something I may have to have some.
There we go.
I see the button. Now there is a little animal that is live and running around today. They said, well, yeah, he's got an awful lot of those protrusions on his shoulders and his back and his legs. But am I going to work with this thing very good today? There it is. There's his underside, his belly. And he's got just as many sharp protrusions on the belly side as he does on the top side. Why does he need all that on the underside? I don't have a clue. But God made him that way. And I'm sure that's the way he wants to keep it. So are there animals that have sharp protrusions on their belly side? Well, the answer is, yep, there it is. Now there may be more than that. This one doesn't live in the ocean, he lives on the desert. But if we have one like this, there's probably some in the ocean, probably more than one. So this puts a cap, a finish on to Job chapter 41. There are animals that do all of these things that we see in the book of Job chapter 41. Now, we'll still go back to that breathing fire. When I taught archaeology, I also taught ancient history and of all impractical things, I taught literature. That was an old farm boy teaching literature who in the school he went to didn't even have a very large library. But ancient literature is different. You don't have to know. I learned a lot about English whenever I learned Greek and Hebrew and all those important languages. But ancient literature just grabs you by the hind leg and won't let go, because you're studying about what's written in other parts of the world. And one of the things that's written in every part of the world is, back in history, fire-breathing dragon, fire-breathing animal. That's in all of the old legends, we call them, myths, you want to call it that. Whether it be written or oral, either way, our history has recorded fire-breathing dragons all over the world. So if we read about fire-breathing dragons in everybody's history all over the world, what conclusion would you draw? There probably was fire-breathing animals scattered all over the world. So just because you haven't seen one doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And we brought up the computer that was found on the Greek ship, ancient, hundreds of years ago. It was designed. We'd never seen one. Didn't think it was even possible. But lo and behold, they found one. Battery power. 2500 BC, found a battery. And amazes, what was he doing 2,500 years ago with a battery? I can think of one really good thing. The second thing could have been curing bacteria and virus and mold and mildew, doing that with a battery. Another thing that was really important about that battery was that he didn't invent it. To me, that was the most interesting thing, is where did he get the idea? And he wrote in his vast writings, he was a magician in Baghdad. He said he learned how to build this thing from the writings of the ancients. Now, I would think 2,500 years BC, that's 4,000 years before us, that anybody who thought that they had read something from the writings of the ancients, it must really have been a long time ago. Now, that just really messes up my mind, which my wife says is a small playground, but it just messes up my mind that there they knew about battery power centuries before 2,500 BC, and then rediscovered in 2,500 BC, and then we rediscovered it not that long ago. So how much other things have we lost? We have been dumbed down, is the phrase that's used frequently. We think we are really, really smart. We're really, really dumb. Things that they knew about a long time ago. Okay. Whenever Alexander the Great was going across the eastern part of the world, conquering the world, he wanted to carry water with him. But he carried water with him in silver vessels. Why did he use silver vessels? Why didn't he use copper?
Silver's antibiotic.
Ooh.
Purified water.
Yes. Yes. Now, how many people knew that?
Well, us too, but.
Fantastic. You're the only two I have ever run into, and that's what my business is built on, is, my business is built on microscopic particles of ionized silver, which kills virus, bacteria, and mold, and mildew. And so we use it whenever we're building clean rooms for hospital surgery rooms and pharmaceutical manufacturing and all of that stuff. Now, there from Alexander the Great all the way down to not too long ago, that had been lost. When my grandparents were coming through here, through Gravin, and on through, they were carrying, and then their predecessors that came on the wagon trains, where did they carry their water? If they were on a wagon train, they carried their water in wooden caskets. And in those wooden casks, where did they put their silverware and their silver dollars? They put them in that cask to keep the water pure. My grandparents, on my mother's side, they did not have a well, they had a cistern. And so a truck would bring water about every month or two, but sometimes that water got blinky, is what they called it. And so when it got blinky, they would take their silverware and they would put it in a bag, set it down in there, and the next day, the water would be tasting good again. And then click, hey, what about putting that over here to kill bacteria? And you can put it on wounds, you can put it on everything. How long ago did they know about silver being able to do that? Thousands of years ago, and then we lost it, and then we reinvented it. And we are so smart because we reinvented something that we lost a long time ago. That was diversion. I didn't intend to get off onto that one, but man, I'm glad I found somebody that knew. Wow, that's great. That is great. Now, I don't remember where I was going. We'll get there. That's why it's on video on there, so I'll know where I'm going. All of the things a lot of the things that we can't explain, a lot of the things that we see and it just baffles our minds, such as mammoths with buttercups in their mouth and 27 identifiable tropical and subtropical plants in their stomach, frozen in less than 17 seconds. How can that have been? How could the Arctic have at one time been tropical? Well, what you see here is a simplification of it. On the second day of creation, God put a firmament in the midst of the waters. Midst means middle of the water. Separated the waters above from the waters below. And so we had a terrarium effect. And that gave us an earth that's totally different than what it is today. That kept the temperature constant all the way around it. That created pressure. You're familiar with the hyperbolic chamber. I've been practicing to make sure I got that word pronounced correctly. I think I did it. If you have a wound that you can't get to heal, they put you in a hyperbolic chamber on a regular basis, and it takes care of that wound. And we mentioned before about amber with the air bubbles that was trapped inside, and that those air bubbles have been isolated, found out that the pressure and the oxygen, much richer than it is today. Those things made a lot of difference. That's why careless weeds grew to 600 feet or taller, that we have fossils of them 600 feet tall, which is a horrible thought whenever you're raised chopping cotton, that those careless weeds, instead of being that high sometimes if I didn't get my job done right, could have been 600 feet. The world that then was perished. We read that in 1 Thessalonians. God says, the world you have now, folks, ain't the same as what it was before the flood. Different. So consequently, there were a lot of things that were different then than is today. Now, that wraps up Job 40 and 41. And I'm going to jump back over to chapter 38 and 39. If you read that, you will see something about a unicorn. And oh, I tell you, my students just love to throw that one at me. Mr. Glenn, we don't have unicorns running around today. What happened? I told him, I said, you need to be old enough to know about a singing group from Ireland, and they sang about the unicorn, and he was playing around, and he just missed the ark. That's the whole deal. Well, they didn't take that as a serious answer, so do we have unicorns running around today? Not up here. Not up here. But yeah, we sure do. So what is a unicorn? Well, my daughter had my ponies that had this little swirly thing coming out of its forehead with sparklers all over it. And my pony had pink tail and all this kind of stuff. Well, we don't have ponies running around with pink tails. But do we have animals with a single horn? Well, sure. We even have whales that have a single horn called a narwhal. We have a rhinoceros with a single. Some of them have two of them. So, yeah, if you want to take a rhinoceros and say, okay, we want to decorate it up because I can merchandise that better as a pretty little white horse with a pink tail, I can put that one horn on it, and we'll call that the unicorn. We can sell that to kids. Or we can look at reality. A unicorn means a single horn. So we had an animal running around with a single horn, and it did make it to the ark, and we still got it today. So for the unicorn, yeah, it's a rhinoceros or something of that nature. All right, now, this gives us other areas. We're through with Job chapter 38 through 41. Just go read it over and over and over and over. Every time you read it, you see something there that's exciting. But now that's ramifications in other areas that we're not going to spend much time on because we don't have a whole long time to do it. But there are some things that are important to us. And I mentioned to you Marco Polo, I think it was 2 sessions ago. Hopefully you went and did some research on Marco Polo. Marco Polo was a really a brilliant guy. His uncle and his daddy were basically explorers, traders. They traded and explored a lot. And Marco Polo did the same, followed in the same footsteps. And he heard about a particular place. It was a box-in canyon, and there were some low-flying UFOs, which I'd say unidentified flying objects. In Texas, that's unidentified fried objects if you're at the state fair. Everything has to be fried, doesn't it? And so Marco Polo went to check this out because it was birds of a different nature. These were basically pterodactyls, pteranodons, flying lizards, whatever description. Go read Marco Polo. So Marco Polo described these low-flying birds. They were ill, they were flying low and slow, and the people were knocking them and killing them with sticks and piling them up at the entrance to the box-in canyon. You say, well, that's kind of harebrained idea. Well, the Sioux Indians, I'm going to say about 200 years ago, maybe just a little over 200 years ago, time flies, they were out at a hunting party, and a storm came up, and about that same time, they saw a bird flying that they had never seen anything like before. And they just watched it, and the thunderstorm came up, lightning struck it and killed it, went down. They went to hunt. The next day they found this bird. It had a bony head, not a crest, but it had a bald head. And it had a long beak with teeth. And on the first joints of its wings were claws, and it had no feathers. And a long tail. I forgot about the long tail. It had the long tail. Now, since they saw, that was the only time they'd ever seen one, it came up during a thunderstorm and lightning killed it. And so guess what they called it? Come on. Thunderbird. That's the Sioux Indians' emblem. If you go back and you look at the old emblem, it's a pteranodon. And that was found here in North America. Maybe a little over 200 years ago. Now, where did that come from? Well, it came from out of the sky. Where there's one, there's more. Just like a deer runs across the road, you know to stop, because where there's one, there's more. Stegosauruses, we saw that from the veterinarian in Ireland. We also saw the excellent on the India temple where a Stegosaurus was carved, and that was centuries ago. There's things like that. Excuse me. Still not gone. That's a terrible way to try to sleep at night, and doing that too. still may have to, Gary, you still may have to take over.
No, would you like to have a cough drop?
Oh, I got one in my pocket, I just hadn't thought to get it out.
They work better if you use them.
That's so, it's a lot better. If you can read that, give me a moment.
My boss said bring him.
I appreciate that, thank you. You know what that is? That's a dragonfly. Look at the wingspan. That's a big one. 50-inch wingspan, that's over 4 feet wide. That's a big dragonfly. But it's still just a dragonfly, hadn't changed a bit, except that nowadays they're a lot smaller. Oh, that helped a bunch, thank you. So if we have dragonflies that were 50-inch wingspan, that may have been a baby. That may not even been a big one. So we've got to be careful whenever we say they reached the size of 50 inches. At least that one did, and some may have been, the mama and dad may have reached 60 or 80. So there are things there that we don't see. There are things that were here that we don't know about today and we don't see. Whether it be dragonflies, whether it be pteranodon, or whether it be a pterodactyl. Just because we don't see them doesn't mean they don't exist. Komodo dragons would hate to meet one of those things. Do they exist? Sure they do. Have I ever seen one? Nope. And hopefully never do. I want you to look at some of the, if you go to this particular place on the internet, you'll see just bushels and bushels of these. That's on the lower part there, that's what we have running around today. There's its predecessor. This one, the little fuzzy animal down there on the bottom is big, but its predecessor was much, much bigger. And these we have fossils of. There's my favorite one, sloth. Do you see the full-grown adult that we have running around today? Do you see it in that picture?
Yeah, hanging on the back.
Hanging on to the side of the big one. The big one was in our past, and the one hanging on to the back of it looks like a little baby. That's the full-grown one of today. So we have lots and lots of animals that were bigger then than they are now.
Not to deviate much, Glenn, but a question for you. Humans, were we bigger? You have archaeological digs where people say they're finding.
Oh, you're
giant-
one step ahead of me there. Were our ancestors bigger than we are today? Well, that depends on a lot of things. One is, which people are you talking about? There's a castle in England that has just rows of, on both sides, rows of armor for their knights. I think the largest one was 5'2", and that was the big one. And some of them were under 5 foot, considerably so. If you're from Vietnam, you're not very small if you're over 5 foot tall. If you go back to Florida, still today, but whenever the I can't remember the name of the Indian tribe there.
Seminoles.
Which one?
Seminoles.
Started with an S.
Seminoles.
That does start with an S,
Yes,
doesn't
sir.
it? Boy, I tell you what, I'm gonna learn a lot. Their average height was 7 feet. And those were guys running around here, some of them still running around here. When I had the restaurant over here in Rogers, back a long time ago, had a guy come in, he wanted a job. And I said, what do you want to do? And he said, I want to wash dishes. That's all I want to do. But he said, I want everybody out of the dishwashing. And I said, okay. He was in college. I'm sorry, that was Golden Corral in Enid. I'll get my restaurants right. His name was Shorty. And I said, no, that's what they call you, because I had to put it on the paperwork. And he, nope, showed him his driver's license, had his name changed. He was 7 foot tall, and he was in that dish room, and he controlled it from wall to wall, because the dish room was probably 9 feet. So we have a lot of guys that are 9 or 7 feet, but did we have giants in those days? Of course we did. Go to Genesis chapter 6, and that's a study in and of itself. The Nephilim. Yes, the giants, men of renown. And they were not righteous men. That's not what they were. And I know the argument on both sides, but they were not the righteous, because we're told no one was righteous except Noah and his 3 sons and their wives. So yes, they're giants, very definitely so. Now, was everybody big? Don't know. I don't know. It's very possible. There are things, ramifications of this. High pressure, high oxygen gives you much easier growth pattern. Somebody got to chop those 600 tall careless weeds, and those things haunt me at night in my dreams. Careless weeds haunted me anyway when I was a kid chopping cotton, but they really haunt me when I think I'm being 600 feet tall. I'm going to say, in my estimation, probably so. Much bigger, certainly healthier. When you look at how long Job lived, he would have lived in the life pattern of right after Noah, Ham, Shem, Japheth. He lived that lifespan. I used to go fishing with my uncle a lot in southwest Oklahoma. And we brought home a catfish 14, 15, 16 inches long. We were proud as we could be. Went off down into South Louisiana and was doing some fishing down there, and I caught a catfish, really a long one, about maybe 24 inches. And I was so proud of that, and everybody was laughing at me. They said, that's not a big one, not in South Louisiana. Why? Why were what I considered big in southwest Oklahoma, you move over to South Louisiana, and those were babies? Because the fish in the wintertime stop growing. And then whenever spring starts, they start growing again. South Louisiana, they didn't have all of that ice and snow and stopped growing. So the fish grew larger. So if the fish grow larger between Blair, Oklahoma and Abbeville, Louisiana, and that's not that far apart, that's just because the world was different. And that's a good area to go off into, yes. God said, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 6, God let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. Verse 7, come on, verse 7, there we go. Whoops, back up. There it is. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. So God tells us that's the only thing created on the second day. That there was an importance. It was very important, or else God wouldn't have spent 2 verses on it. And on the second day of creation, all the things he had to create, on the second day of creation, this was it, the firmament. Extremely important. Though we come sometimes just read right over it. Now,
Question.
yes.
So the firmament is another word for the atmosphere? So waters under the firmament have no trouble understanding.
Right. Where's the water above?
Yeah.
Okay. At some point, it says where the birds fly. So it's not outer space that's being referred to by this translation. It is where the birds fly. We have, I think, 6 different layers of our of our atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
2 of those. I am so sorry about this. 2 of those layers in our atmosphere have the capability of holding water to the point of 100% saturation. That's 2 layers up there. That if you take pure water and take it up there and pour it out, it can just stay right there. I'm not talking about clouds. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about pure water to the point of 100% saturation. 2 layers in our atmosphere that has that capability. Before the life expectancy on the chart, as you see from, as they got more and more into our period of time, life expectancy got shorter and shorter. This guy here, even though he has a pretty face, he definitely has a very unpretty philosophy. Mr. Dawkins. He's the spokesman, or was the spokesman for the theory of evolution. And remember, evolution has always just been a theory. It's never been proven. He says we don't need evidence because we know that evolution is true. So whenever he was asked, well, prove it. He said, we don't need proof. Now we need proof, and we're told, God tells us, you prove everything and hold fast to that which is true. So we have to prove it. The evolutionists, according to Dawkins, who was the spokesman for them, they don't need to prove it. They just know it's true. Coy and I were talking. Coy and I have been doing a lot of talking. One of the things that came up was, okay, if you have a dinosaur in a bed of rock, a Tyrannosaurus rex, let's say, if you have that in a bed of rock, how do you know how old that Tyrannosaurus rex is? Well, we know it's 40 billion years old because the rock that it's in is that old. Okay, so how do you know how old that rock is? Well, because it's got that 40 billion year old dinosaur in it. I mean, that's plain and simple. It's not plain and simple. Whether it be petrified wood, whether it be coal, or whatever it might be, just because it's there doesn't mean it's old because it's in rock. We're going to get into some of these this is part of the ramification of getting into all of this. Oh, that's the wrong one.
More next week.
For next week, that's right, because we're out of time. I'm going to show you some things that found in stone and coal or in stone. One of those in Thomas, Oklahoma. That's not very far from here. They found a cast iron pot in a chunk of big chunk of coal, and they were breaking it up and putting it into the firing system for the utility company, Thomas, Oklahoma. It's still here, you can go look at it. The lady found a gold link chain inside a chunk of coal. You want to go to Germany, you can go look at it. And part of that chain is still there in the chunk of coal. And it's in the museum. When I was in Paonia, Colorado, there were 3 coal mines, 2 of them were in operation. They shut down operation. Now, I think I've mentioned this before. They shut down operation because they found a tree. They found a tree. It was leaning, had not fallen over, but it was leaning. Now, the tree had turned to coal. It was gray coal, and the matrix around it was black coal. But it was pretty obvious. You could see this gray tree with the limbs still on it, and the leaves still attached and turned to gray coal. The trunk had not fallen over, but was leaning, with the limbs and leaves still attached. How long does it take for leaves to fall off of a dead tree? Not very long. But it started turning coal. Started while the leaves were still attached, and became coal. Oh, there's so much stuff. That just gets us started. Ancient history. If studying all of this in the Bible doesn't get you excited about ancient history, you need to wake up. Ancient history, the Bible is exciting for several different reasons. It's our salvation, but it also is the best history book you'll ever get your hands on. And it doesn't talk a whole lot, but it talks enough about it to where it just makes you want to know more and more and more. The Hittites. Oh, the Hittites never existed, of course. Lo and behold, if we didn't find in Turkey, here's this entrance to a big city, and it says the home of the Hittites. And that wasn't the ball team. All right, go ahead and push the button, and I'll get off here.